The evening rush at Bellini's had begun like any other. The clinking of fine china and crystal glasses filled the air, as patrons in expensive suits and designer dresses chatted over their meals. In the corner of the restaurant, a grand piano stood, its polished surface reflecting the warm glow of the overhead chandeliers. Among the bustling servers weaving through the tables was a woman in her late 20s. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and though her uniform was identical to those of her co-workers, there was something different about her, a certain grace in her movements, a faraway look in her eyes that appeared whenever the piano music drifted through the dining room. "Table 12 needs their check and 14 is complaining about the wine again," barked the floor manager as he passed by. "I'll take care of it," she replied, her voice soft but steady. For 3 years now, May had been working at Bellini's, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The tips were good enough to help pay off the mountain of debt that had accumulated after her mother's illness, good enough to keep a roof over her head, but not quite good enough to heal the ache in her heart whenever she heard music. As she delivered dessert menus to a group of business executives, May allowed herself a moment to close her eyes as the restaurant's pianist transitioned into Debussy's Clair de Lune. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side, muscle memory taking over as they traced invisible patterns in the air. For a brief second, she was somewhere else entirely. A concert hall filled with applause, the weight of a Steinway beneath her fingertips. "Excuse me, miss, we're ready to order." The voice snapped her back to reality. May apologized with a practiced smile and took down their selections. This was her life now, remembering coffee preferences instead of complex chord progressions, balancing trays instead of melodies. None of her co-workers knew about her past. They didn't know that the quiet waitress who always volunteered for the late shift had once been featured in Classical Musician magazine as one of the most promising young pianists of her generation. They hadn't seen the standing ovations, the tears in the eyes of audience members moved by her interpretations of Chopin and Rachmaninoff. They couldn't possibly know that at 17, she had been accepted to Juilliard on a full scholarship, her future seemingly set in stone. Or that by 21, she had performed with 3 major orchestras and was preparing for her first international tour. "You look tired tonight," remarked Thomas, an older waiter who had taken May under his wing when she first started. He handed her a cup of coffee as they stood in the kitchen during a brief lull. "Just the usual," she replied with a small smile. "Bills, you know." Thomas nodded sympathetically. "My daughter's college tuition is killing me. But hey, at least we have jobs, right? In this economy." May nodded absently, her attention drawn to the music once again. The pianist, an older man named Richard, was playing something by Beethoven now, his technique precise if somewhat lacking in emotion. She could hear the small mistakes he made, a rushed passage here, a missed note there, flaws most patrons would never notice, but that stood out to her trained ear like smudges on a clean window. "You always get that look when he plays," Thomas observed. "You like classical music?" "I used to," May replied simply. Before Thomas could press further, they were called back to work. The night continued in its familiar rhythm. Take orders, deliver food, refill drinks, clear plates, repeat. The mechanical nature of it all was both comforting and suffocating. May moved through the motions with the efficiency born of long practice, her mind often elsewhere. During her break, she slipped out to the small staff room and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her music app until she found a recording of Vladimir Horowitz playing the piece Richard had butchered earlier. Closing her eyes, she let the music wash over her, her fingers moving in her lap as if playing along. "That's quite the hand workout you're doing there." May's eyes flew open to find the restaurant owner, Mrs. Chen, watching her with curiosity. She quickly put her phone away, embarrassed at being caught. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "No need to apologize," Mrs. Chen said, waving a hand dismissively, "though I've never seen someone air piano quite so intensely before." May felt her cheeks flush. "Old habit," she murmured. Mrs. Chen studied her for a moment. "You play?" A simple question that felt anything but simple to answer. Did she play? Not anymore. Not really. Not since that terrible night 7 years ago when her mother had collapsed during her recital. The first sign of the illness that would eventually take her life and May's dreams along with it. I used to, she said finally, the same answer she'd given Thomas. Mrs. Chen seemed to sense she'd touched on something painful and mercifully changed the subject. Well, break time's almost over. Table 20 has a birthday celebration coming in. As May returned to the dining room, she noticed a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, staring at the piano with longing. The child's parents were engaged, in conversation with friends at their table, paying little attention as their daughter slipped from her seat and approached the instrument. Richard had stepped away for his break, leaving the piano momentarily unattended. The girl reached out a tentative hand to touch the keys, pressing one softly and smiling at the sound. Something in the child's expression, that pure joy at the simple act of making music, struck May like a physical blow. She remembered that feeling, remembered being that young girl fascinated by the magic of 88 keys and the infinite worlds they could create. Before she could think better of it, May approached the piano. "Do you play?" she asked the girl, gently. The child looked up, startled but not frightened. "I'm learning. I have lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays." "That's wonderful," May said, and meant it. "What's your favorite piece to play?" "Für Elise," the girl replied proudly. "But I can only play the easy part." May smiled. "That was one of my first pieces, too." The girl's eyes widened. "You play?" That question again. So simple, so complicated. "I used to," May began, but stopped herself. Why did she always answer that way? As if her relationship with music existed only in the past tense. As if her fingers had forgotten the feel of ivory and ebony beneath them. The truth was, she still played, though not on a real piano. Her tiny apartment couldn't accommodate one, and she couldn't afford it anyway. But she had a small keyboard with weighted keys that she kept under her bed, taking it out late at night when the world was quiet. She would play with headphones on, tears streaming down her face as her fingers remembered what her heart had tried to forget. "I do play," she corrected herself, the admission feeling like both a betrayal and a homecoming. The girl's face lit up. "Can you show me something, please?" May glanced around nervously. Richard would be back soon. Mrs. Chen might not approve of staff using the piano. She had tables to attend to. "I really shouldn't," she began. But the hope in the child's eyes made her pause. From across the room, she caught Mrs. Chen watching the interaction. Instead of the disapproval May expected, the owner gave her a curious nod, as if granting permission. "Just a quick piece," May found herself saying as she sat down on the bench, making room for the girl to sit beside her. Her hands hovered over the keys, suddenly uncertain. It had been so long since she'd played on a proper piano, even longer, since she'd done so in front of anyone. What if she'd lost her touch? What if years of carrying trays and typing orders into the restaurant system had dulled her technique? But as soon as her fingers made contact with the keys, something inside her awakened. She began to play a simple Mozart piece, one that had been among the first complex works she'd mastered as a child. The notes came easily, muscle memory taking over as her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She felt rather than saw people turning to look. The usual dining room chatter quieted somewhat as patrons noticed that the music had changed, become more vibrant, more emotional, more alive. When she finished the short piece, the girl beside her was beaming. "That was amazing. I want to play like that someday." "You will," May assured her, feeling strangely light. "Just keep practicing." As she stood up, she noticed several patrons watching her with interest. An older couple at table 7 was smiling appreciatively. The businessmen at table 12 had paused their conversation to listen. "That was quite beautiful," remarked a woman at the nearest table. "Are you filling in for the regular pianist tonight?" "Oh no," May replied, suddenly self-conscious again. "I just work here. I'm your server, actually." The woman looked surprised. "Well, you're clearly in the wrong job." The comment, though meant as a compliment, stung with its unintentional truth. May excused herself and hurried back to work, trying to ignore the strange mix of emotions the brief performance had stirred up. Joy, regret, longing, fear. As she passed the kitchen, Thomas caught her arm. "I had no idea you could play like that," he said, clearly impressed. "Why didn't you ever mention it?" May shrugged uncomfortably. "It's just something from another life." But was it? The feeling of the keys beneath her fingers had felt so right, so natural, like returning to a home she'd never truly left. For those brief moments at the piano, she had felt more herself than she had in years. Richard returned from his break, reclaiming his position at the piano. As May continued her shift, she found herself listening to his playing with different ears, not just noticing the technical flaws, but recognizing something else. He played without passion, without heart. He was going through the motions, much as she did with her serving duties. Is that what her life had become? A series of motions without meaning? As she cleared a table near the piano, she heard Richard addressing Mrs. Chen. "I might need next weekend off. My daughter's getting married." "In Cleveland." "The charity gala?" Mrs. Chen looked concerned. "That's our biggest event of the year. I can't have no pianist." "I'm trying to find a replacement," Richard assured her. "I've got a few calls out." May continued working, pretending not to have heard. But as she moved through the restaurant for the remainder of her shift, something had changed. The seed of an idea, terrifying yet exhilarating, had taken root in her mind. Perhaps some dreams weren't meant to stay buried forever. The week following May's brief moment at the piano passed in a blur of routine. She took orders, delivered meals, and smiled at customers just as she always had. But something had shifted inside her. That small taste of music, of her old life, had awakened feelings she'd spent years trying to suppress. At home in her tiny apartment, she pulled her keyboard out from under the bed more frequently now. Her fingers, once hesitant, moved with growing confidence across the keys. She played late into the night, headphones on so as not to disturb her neighbors, losing herself in Chopin nocturnes and Bach preludes. "You seem different lately," Thomas remarked one evening as they prepared for the dinner rush. "More, I don't know, alive somehow." May smiled but said nothing. How could she explain that she'd been having conversations in her head with her late mother? That she kept hearing her mother's voice saying what she'd always insisted during May's childhood. "Music isn't just what you do, little one. It's who you are." For years, May had pushed that identity away. After her mother's death, playing had felt impossible. Each note a reminder of her loss, each melody tied to memories too painful to revisit. The medical bills had piled up. Her scholarship had lapsed during her absence from school, and gradually, survival had taken precedence over dreams. But now, those few minutes at Bellini's piano had cracked open a door she thought permanently sealed. Saturday night arrived, and with it came news that made the entire staff tense. "The Chen Foundation Charity Gala is next weekend," Mrs. Chen announced during their pre-shift meeting. "As you all know, this is our biggest event of the year. The governor might attend, along with several major donors. Everything must be perfect." The staff nodded solemnly. The annual gala was legendary for its high-profile guest list and the generous tips that followed a well-executed evening. "Unfortunately," Mrs. Chen continued with a frown, "Richard has a family wedding and won't be available to play. I've been calling around, but finding a replacement on short notice has been difficult." May felt her heart rate quicken. The seed of an idea that had been growing all week suddenly pushed toward the surface, urging her to speak up, but fear held her back. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she embarrassed herself in front of the city's elite? "We'll continue looking for a pianist," Mrs. Chen concluded. "In the meantime, let's focus on making tonight perfect." The evening proceeded as usual until about 9 o'clock, when a commotion near the piano caught everyone's attention. Richard had stopped playing mid-song, his face pale as he clutched his right wrist. Mrs. Chen hurried over, and May edged closer to hear their conversation. "Just a sharp pain," Richard was saying. "It's been bothering me all week. I thought I could work through it, but—" "You should see a doctor," Mrs. Chen insisted. "Tendinitis is nothing to ignore." But the rest of the night, "We'll manage," Mrs. Chen assured him, though May could see the worry in her eyes. Saturday nights at Bellini's were always busy, and the ambient piano music was part of the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. As Richard gathered his things and left, Mrs. Chen addressed the staff who had gathered nearby. "It seems we have a more immediate pianist problem than I thought. Does anyone have ideas?" The silence that followed was heavy with implication. May felt her colleagues' eyes turning toward her, remembering her brief performance days earlier. "What? About May?" Thomas finally suggested. "She played beautifully the other day." Heat rushed to May's face as Mrs. Chen looked at her questioningly. I couldn't possibly," she stammered. "It's been years since I've played professionally. I'm out of practice." "You sounded pretty in practice to me," said one of the younger servers. Mrs. Chen studied May thoughtfully. "You never mentioned you were a professional." May looked down at her sensible black shoes, part of the uniform she'd worn for 3 years now. "It was a long time ago," she said softly. "Well, we need someone now." Mrs. Chen replied practically. "The question is simple. Can you play dinner music for the next few hours?" Put that way, the question did seem simple. Could she play dinner music, of course? Even on her worst day, she could handle light classical and jazz standards. The real question, the one that made her pulse race and her palms sweat, was whether she was ready to be seen as a musician again, to reclaim that part of her identity she'd locked away after her mother's death. "I can try," May said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Chen nodded decisively. "Good. Thomas will cover your tables. Go wash up, and then the piano is yours." 10 minutes later, May found herself sitting at the grand piano, her waitress, uniform exchanged for the spare black dress she kept in her locker for emergencies. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the bench. 3 years of serving the city's wealthiest diners, and suddenly she was on display in a completely different way. She recognized some of the patrons, the older couple who always ordered the same bottle of Merlot, the businessman who left generous tips but never looked servers in the eye, the food critic who visited monthly and sent back at least one dish, each time. What would they think when they realized their waitress was now providing their entertainment? May took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She began with something simple, a gentle Debussy piece that she could play in her sleep. The familiar notes helped calm her nerves, and gradually, she felt herself relaxing into the music. As one piece flowed into the next, May allowed herself to get lost in the performance. She played from memory, her repertoire more extensive than even she had remembered. Chopin waltzes gave way to jazz standards, then to Gershwin and back to Bach. She let her fingers guide her, surprised at how much her body remembered even after years away from a proper piano. She became aware, in a distant sort of way, that the restaurant had grown quieter. The usual dinner chatter had softened, and more people seemed to be listening than before. When she finished a particularly moving Schubert impromptu, actual applause broke out from several tables. "Who is she?" she heard someone ask. "That's our waitress," came the surprised reply. During a brief pause between pieces, Thomas appeared at her side with a glass of water. "You're amazing," he whispered. "Everyone's talking about you. Mrs. Chen looks like she might cry. With happiness, I mean." May took a sip of water, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was. "Are my tables okay?" Thomas laughed. "That's what you're worried about?" "Yes, your tables are fine, but look around. You've transformed the place." He was right, she realized as she glanced around the dining room. The atmosphere had shifted. Couples were holding hands across tables, listening intently. A group of businessmen had paused their meeting to turn their chairs toward the piano. Even the kitchen staff had found excuses to peek through the doors. For the next 2 hours, May played as she hadn't played in years, not just with technical skill, but with heart. Each piece was a conversation, each note a word in a language she'd almost forgotten she spoke fluently. And the diners responded, their appreciation evident in their attentive silence and enthusiastic applause. As the evening wound down and the last customers paid their bills, Mrs. Chen approached the piano with an uncharacteristic smile on her normally stern face. "Well," she said, It seems you've been hiding quite a talent. May blushed. Thank you for giving me the chance to play tonight. The question is, Mrs. Chen continued, her expression growing serious. Why is someone with your ability carrying dinner plates? The blunt question caught May off guard. Life happened, she answered simply. My mother got sick. There were bills. Music became complicated. Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. And now? Is it still complicated? May looked down at her hands, really seeing them for the first time in years, not as tools for carrying trays or typing orders, but as instruments capable of creating beauty. Less than it was, she admitted. Good, Mrs. Chen said decisively, because I have a proposition for you. The restaurant was empty now except for staff cleaning up. Mrs. Chen gestured for May to follow her to a quiet corner table, where they both sat down. As you know, we lost our pianist for the charity gala, Mrs. Chen began. After hearing you tonight, I'd like to offer you the position. May's heart leaped into her throat. The gala? But that's a much bigger deal than dinner service. There will be important people and they will appreciate genuine talent, Mrs. Chen finished for her. The pay is 5 times our usual rate for special events. The sum Mrs. Chen named made May's eyes widen. It was more than she made in 2 weeks of shifts, tips included. I don't know what to say, May stammered. Say yes, Mrs. Chen replied simply. And then tell me why someone who plays like you has been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Perhaps it was the emotional high of performing again, or perhaps it was simply time. But May found herself telling Mrs. Chen everything, about her early promise, her scholarship to Juilliard, her mother's collapse during her recital, and the long illness that followed, the crushing medical debt, her withdrawal from school to become a full-time caregiver, and finally, her inability to return to music after her mother's death. Playing reminded me too much of her, May explained, tears threatening. And without her support, without that scholarship, there was no way to go back. Mrs. Chen listened silently, her usual businesslike demeanor softened by genuine concern. When May finished, she reached across the table and did something completely unexpected. She took May's hand in hers. My husband was a cellist, she said quietly. Not professional, but passionate. After he died, I couldn't listen to cello music for 5 years. So, I understand something about loss in music. May looked up, surprised by this personal revelation, from her usually private employer. But he would have been the first to say that music isn't just about our pain, Mrs. Chen continued. It's also about healing. Perhaps it's time for you to heal. The words hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. The gala is next Saturday, Mrs. Chen said, returning to her practical self. We'll adjust your schedule so you can practice during the day. The guest list includes some influential people in the arts. Who knows what might come of it? As May left the restaurant that night, the city seemed different somehow, more alive with possibility than it had in years. The idea of playing at the gala terrified and excited her in equal measure. 1 week to prepare. 1 week to decide if she was truly ready to step back into the world of music, not just for a few hours of dinner entertainment, but perhaps for something more. At home, she pulled out her small keyboard and played until dawn, her fingers remembering what her heart had never truly forgotten. The week leading up to the charity gala passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Chen had kept her word, adjusting May's schedule so she could practice during the day when the restaurant was closed. For the first time in years, May found herself sitting at a real grand piano for hours each day, the sunlight streaming through Bellini's large windows as her fingers reacquainted themselves with the instrument's weight and response. On Monday, she had arrived nervously, half expecting Mrs. Chen to have changed her mind. Instead, she found the restaurant owner waiting with a folder of sheet music. These are the standard pieces we usually include in the gala program, Mrs. Chen explained. But feel free to add your own selections. I trust your judgment. That simple statement, I trust your judgment, had nearly brought May to tears. How long had it been since someone had faith in her musical instincts? Since before her mother's illness, certainly. Now it was Friday afternoon, the day before the gala, and May was running through her program one final time. She had chosen a mix of classical pieces and more contemporary compositions, aiming to create an atmosphere that was sophisticated yet accessible. She wanted music that would enhance the evening without overwhelming it, pieces that could serve as both background for conversation and moments of focused listening. As the final notes of a Ludovico Einaudi piece faded away, she heard applause from the doorway. Turning, she saw Thomas standing there with a cloth over his arm. "Just finished setting up the tables for tonight," he explained. "Couldn't help but stop and listen. You're going to amaze everyone tomorrow." May smiled, grateful for his support. The entire staff had been encouraging, though she sensed some curiosity too. They'd known her for years as the quiet, reliable waitress, not as a musician of considerable talent. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's been so long since I played for a real audience." "Last Saturday wasn't a real audience?" Thomas asked with a grin. "That was different. I wasn't announced as the performer. Nobody came expecting anything specific." She closed the piano lid gently. "Tomorrow people will be watching, judging." Thomas shook his head. "They'll be too busy being impressed and eating Mrs. Chen's overpriced food." That made May laugh, breaking some of the tension she'd been carrying. She gathered her notes and stood up. "I should get home and rest. Big day tomorrow." As she walked through the dining room, Mrs. Chen called out to her from the office. "May, a moment please." Inside the small office, Mrs. Chen was reviewing seating charts. She looked up as May entered. "How do you feel about the program?" "Good, I think. I've settled on the pieces and practiced the transitions." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Now, about tomorrow night. What will you wear?" The question caught May off guard. She hadn't thought much about her appearance, assuming she would wear the same black dress she'd worn when filling in for Richard. Seeing her hesitation, Mrs. Chen continued, "This is an important event. You'll be representing Bellini's, but more importantly, you'll be presenting yourself as the artist you are." Artist. The word sent a shiver through May. Was that still who she was? Could she reclaim that identity after all this time? "I don't really have anything suitable," she confessed. "My performance clothes from years ago probably don't even fit anymore." Mrs. Chen considered this for a moment, then opened her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "This is an advance on your payment for tomorrow. I suggest you use it to find something appropriate." May started to protest, but Mrs. Chen held up a hand to stop her. "Consider it an investment in both of our futures," she said firmly. "Now go. The shops on Michigan Avenue are open late tonight." 2 hours later, May stood in front of a fitting room mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The dress she'd chosen was simple but elegant, deep blue with a subtle shimmer that caught the light when she moved. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she'd bought since before her mother's illness, when they'd splurged on a gown for her first major recital. "You look lovely," the saleswoman commented. "Special occasion?" "I'm performing tomorrow," May replied, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "A piano recital at a charity event." "How wonderful. Are you a professional musician?" The question hung in the air. A week ago, May would have quickly said no, explaining that she used to play but had given it up years ago. Now she wasn't so sure how to answer. "I'm finding my way back to it," she said finally. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, her mind cycling through the pieces she would play, imagining her fingers on the keys. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of her mother sitting in the front row of a concert hall, smiling with pride. The next day dawned bright and clear. May spent the morning in quiet preparation, playing through difficult passages on her small keyboard, then resting her hands. By mid-afternoon, nervous energy had her pacing her apartment. Finally, unable to stand the waiting any longer, she dressed carefully, applied light makeup, and headed to Bellini's much earlier than necessary. The restaurant had been transformed. The usual tables had been rearranged to create a more open space. White linens, fine china, and crystal gleamed under the chandeliers. Floral arrangements in soft whites and golds adorned every surface, and a small stage had been set up near the piano to accommodate brief speeches later in the evening. The staff was bustling about with last-minute preparations. Mrs. Chen stood, in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, directing the controlled chaos with practiced efficiency. "May?" she exclaimed when she spotted her. "You look wonderful. The piano has been tuned this morning. Would you like to test it before the guests arrive?" Grateful for something concrete to do, May made her way to the instrument. She ran through a few scales and arpeggios, feeling the action of the keys, adjusting to the piano's unique voice. It was a fine instrument, better than she'd realized during her previous playing here. "It sounds beautiful," she told Mrs. Chen, who had come to stand nearby. "As do you," the older woman replied. "Now guests will begin arriving at 7. You'll start playing at 7:30. The formal program begins at 8 with dinner served afterward. You'll have breaks, of course, but I'd like music throughout most of the evening." May nodded, mentally reviewing her set list again. "And May," Mrs. Chen added, her voice softening slightly, "remember that music is a gift. You're not just playing notes. You're giving something of yourself to everyone in this room." The words echoed something her mother used to say, and May felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, unable to speak. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of anticipation. May retreated to a quiet corner as the staff completed their preparations and the first guests began to arrive. From her vantage point, she watched as Chicago's elite filed in, men in tuxedos, women in designer gowns, air kisses exchanged, champagne, flutes lifted in greeting. Among them, she recognized a few regular customers, including a woman who had once left her a $100 tip after May had recommended the perfect wine pairing. There were unfamiliar faces, too. A famous local news anchor, a retired basketball player who had to duck slightly to enter the room, and according to the excited whispers of the staff, the governor and his wife were indeed expected. At precisely 7:30, Mrs. Chen caught her eye and nodded. It was time. May made her way to the piano, aware of curious glances following her progress. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and took a deep breath. Then, without introduction or fanfare, she began to play. She started with something light and familiar, a Debussy piece that floated through the air like perfume, present but not demanding attention. As conversations continued around her, she felt herself settling into a rhythm, her initial nervousness fading as the music took over. For the next half hour, she provided the perfect accompaniment to the cocktail portion of the evening. Elegant, background music that enhanced the atmosphere without overwhelming it. She moved smoothly from classical to more contemporary pieces, occasionally glancing up to gauge the room's response. What she saw encouraged her. People were listening even as they chatted. Some had positioned themselves near the piano, cocktails in hand, clearly appreciating her skill. Mrs. Chen, moving efficiently through the crowd, caught her eye occasionally and smiled approvingly. 8 o'clock, the formal program began. Mrs. Chen welcomed everyone, spoke briefly about the charity they were supporting, a music education program for underprivileged children, May realized with a start, and then introduced various dignitaries in attendance. "And providing our musical entertainment tonight," Mrs. Chen concluded, "is a remarkable pianist we are fortunate to have discovered. Please enjoy the talents of Mei Lin throughout the evening." There was polite applause, and May nodded in acknowledgement, surprised to hear her name announced so formally. As the speeches continued, she played softly, adapting her volume to complement rather than compete with the speakers. When dinner was served, she took her first break, accepting a glass of water from Thomas, who gave her a thumbs up. "You're crushing it," he whispered. "Everyone's asking about you." Before she could respond, a tall woman in an elegant black gown approached the piano. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the crisp accent of someone who had studied British English. "Your playing is exquisite. Have you recorded any albums?" The question caught May off guard. "No," she replied. "I haven't performed professionally in some time." The woman looked surprised. "That's hard to believe given your skill. Are you classically trained?" "Yes," May said. "I studied at Juilliard, briefly." "Intriguing," the woman murmured. She extended a business card. "I'm Nora Winters, artistic director at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra." I'd love to speak with you further when you have a moment. May accepted the card with slightly trembling fingers, nodding mutely as the woman returned to her table. As she prepared to begin playing again, May felt a curious lightness in her chest. For years, she had defined herself by what she had lost: her mother, her education, her career path. But sitting here tonight with music flowing from her fingers and a renowned artistic director's card in her pocket, she realized something important. She hadn't lost her gift. It had been waiting patiently all along, through the grief and struggle and long hours of waiting tables, waiting for her to be ready to embrace it again. As she positioned her hands over the keys, May made a decision. For her next piece, instead of the light classical selection she had planned, she would play something more challenging. Something that would show not just her technical skill, but her heart. She began Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most beautiful and difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. As the opening notes rang out, conversations around the room gradually quieted. This was no longer background music. This was a performance. May closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her. Each phrase told a story of loss and hope, struggle and triumph. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence, drawing out the melody, building to the turbulent middle section with its cascading notes. When she reached the coda, that breathtaking flurry of octaves and chords that forms the piece's climactic conclusion, she was no longer in Bellini's restaurant. She was simply in the music, every part of her focused on bringing those notes to life with all the emotion and skill she possessed. The final chord resonated through the silent room. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, as if a spell had been broken, applause erupted. Not the polite acknowledgement of before, but genuine, enthusiastic appreciation. May opened her eyes to see the entire room on their feet, applauding. Mrs. Chen was beaming. Thomas was whistling. And at a table near the center, Nora Winters was watching her with intense interest. In that moment, surrounded by the sound of applause she hadn't heard in years, May felt something shift inside her, a door opening to a future she had thought forever closed. The waitress had become a pianist once more. The morning after the gala, May woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment windows. For a moment she wondered if the previous night had been a dream. The standing ovation, the card from Nora Winters, the feeling of finally being seen not as a waitress, but as the musician she truly was. But there on her nightstand lay the evidence: Nora's business card and a handwritten note from Mrs. Chen, thanking her for a performance that elevated the entire evening. It had happened. All of it. She reached for her phone and was startled to see dozens of notifications. Thomas had texted, "You're famous. Check your social media." Several other coworkers had sent similar messages. Confused, May opened her rarely used social media account to find hundreds of new followers and comments. Someone had posted a video of her playing Chopin's Ballade at the gala, and it was spreading rapidly across the internet. "Does anyone know who this pianist is?" read one comment. "Apparently she's a waitress at Bellini's in Chicago," another replied. "Unbelievable talent. Why is she waiting tables?" May put down her phone, overwhelmed. She'd been invisible for so long, content to blend into the background of other people's dining experiences. Now suddenly strangers were discussing her online, sharing her music, asking questions about her life. Her phone rang, an unknown number. With slight hesitation, she answered, "Hello, is this Mei Lin?" The voice was familiar. The crisp, authoritative tone of Nora Winters. "Yes, this is she," May replied, her heart beginning to race. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to speak with you before my day becomes hectic." There was a pause. "Your performance last night was extraordinary. I've rarely heard that Chopin piece played with such emotional depth, especially in a restaurant setting." "Thank you," May managed, unsure what else to say. "I'm curious about your story," Nora continued. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you studied at Juilliard but had to leave. Would you be willing to meet me for coffee this week? I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you." Possibilities. The word hung in the air, full of promise and uncertainty. Of course, May heard herself say. I'd be happy to meet. They arranged to meet at a cafe near Symphony Center the following afternoon. After hanging up, May sat on the edge of her bed, trying to process everything that was happening. Just 1 week ago, she had been a waitress who occasionally played her keyboard late at night, haunted by dreams of what might have been. Now, the artistic director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra wanted to meet with her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. Come to the restaurant when you can, many people asking about you. When May arrived at Bellini's 2 hours later, she was greeted with applause from the staff gathered for the pre-lunch meeting. Even the cooks had come out from the kitchen to join in. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, uncharacteristically demonstrative as she took May's hands in hers. You were magnificent, she said. Absolutely magnificent. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, May replied, genuinely moved by the support. I've received 17 calls this morning, Mrs. Chen continued, asking if the pianist from the video will be playing regularly at Bellini's. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. What do you think? Would you consider a regular weekend engagement? We would adjust your schedule, of course, and the pay would reflect your talent. Before May could respond, Thomas chimed in. She's going to be too famous for us soon. I heard Nora Winters gave her a card. Mrs. Chen looked at May with new interest. Is this true? Nora rarely approaches new talent directly. May nodded, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the attention. We're meeting tomorrow. I'm not sure what will come of it. Well, until you're signed with the symphony, my offer stands, Mrs. Chen said pragmatically. Think about it and let me know. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Regular customers who had seen the video online congratulated her. Several asked if she would play something, but Mrs. Chen firmly told them that May was working as a server today, and they would need to return for her scheduled performances. By the time her shift ended, May was exhausted, but exhilarated. On her way home, she stopped at a small music shop she'd passed hundreds of times but never entered. Inside, sheet music filled the shelves and several pianos were displayed for customers to try. An older man looked up from behind the counter. Can I help you find something? I'm just browsing, May replied, running her fingers lightly over the cover of a book of Chopin's complete works. Are you a pianist? He asked. She hesitated only briefly. Yes, she said. I am. The simple admission felt like stepping into a new skin, or perhaps returning to her true one. Feel free to try any of the instruments, the man offered, gesturing to the display models. May approached a modestly priced upright piano. It wasn't a concert grand, but it was real. With weight and resonance her small keyboard couldn't match. She sat down and began to play a simple Mozart sonata, losing herself in the familiar notes. She finished. The shop owner was watching her with appreciation. You play beautifully, he said. Are you looking to purchase? May glanced at the price tag and sighed. Even with the money from the gala and Mrs. Chen's offer, a real piano was beyond her means, especially in her tiny apartment. Someday, she said wistfully. For now, I'm making do with a portable keyboard. The man seemed to consider something. We have a rental program, he said finally, for serious students and performers. The monthly fee is reasonable and it applies toward purchase if you decide to buy. May felt a flicker of hope. Really? Even for an adult student? You're clearly beyond the student level, the man said kindly. But yes, the program is open to anyone serious about playing. Here's my card. Think about it. She left the shop with the card and a renewed sense of possibility. Her life was changing so quickly it was hard to keep up. But one thing was becoming clear. Music wasn't just her past. It could be her future too. The next day, May arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, nervously smoothing her simple black dress. She'd chosen to wear the only professional outfit she owned, wanting to make a good impression on Nora Winters. This meeting felt important, perhaps life-changing. The cafe was busy with the afternoon rush. But she spotted Nora immediately. The artistic director had a commanding presence, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant knot, her posture impeccable as she typed on her laptop at a corner table. Taking a deep breath, May approached. "Ms. Winters, I'm May Lin." Nora looked up and smiled, closing her laptop. "Please call me Nora, and thank you for meeting me on such short notice." As they settled with their coffees, Nora got straight to the point. "Your performance the other night was remarkable, particularly given the setting. Mrs. Chen tells me you haven't played professionally in years. May I ask why?" There was no judgment in her tone, just genuine curiosity. May found herself telling her story once again, the promising start, her mother's illness, the financial struggles that had forced her to abandon her education and dreams. Nora listened attentively, occasionally asking questions about her training and repertoire. When May finished, the older woman sat back considering. "Life can certainly throw obstacles in our path," she said finally. "But talent like yours rarely disappears. It just waits for the right moment to reemerge." She took a sip of her coffee. "Have you considered returning to performance?" May thought. About Mrs. Chen's offer, about the rental piano, about the rush she'd felt playing for an appreciative audience. "I'm beginning to," she admitted. "But it's been so long. I'm not sure where to start." "That's why I wanted to meet with you," Nora said, leaning forward slightly. "The symphony has a special concert series called New Voices that features emerging talent. We had a cancellation for next month's program. Based on what I heard at the gala, I'd like to offer you that slot." Me stared at her, stunned. "You want me to play with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra?" "It's a solo slot, 20 minutes in a varied program," Nora clarified. "But yes, essentially, it would be a significant opportunity for someone returning to the field." A wave of emotion washed over May, excitement, terror, disbelief. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nora suggested with a smile, "unless you have a compelling reason not to." Did she have a reason not to? Fear, certainly. Doubt about whether she could prepare adequately in just a month. Worry about returning to a world she'd left behind so abruptly. But weighing against those concerns was the undeniable truth that had become clear at the gala. She was still a musician at heart. Always had been, even during the years of serving plates instead of playing concertos. "Yes," May said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Nora's smile widened. "Excellent. We'll need to move quickly. What piece or pieces were you considering?" They spent the next hour discussing repertoire options, scheduling, and practical details. Nora was professional but warm, clearly excited about discovering May's talent. By the end of their meeting, May had agreed to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a challenging piece she had begun studying just before her mother's illness. "It's ambitious," Nora acknowledged. "But from what I heard at the gala, you have both the technical skill and emotional depth it requires. We'll schedule some rehearsal time with the orchestra before the performance." As they parted, Nora handed her a folder with details about the concert series. "One more thing," she said. "That video from the gala has over 500,000 views now. People are already interested in your story. Our publicity department will want to speak with you about interviews." May blinked in surprise. "Interviews?" "The Waitress turned concert pianist is a compelling narrative," Nora explained. "Human interest stories help fill seats, but we can discuss the details later this week." Walking home, May felt as though she were moving through a dream. The folder in her hands contained the next chapter of her life, a chapter she had thought forever closed. At her apartment, she pulled out her keyboard and the old, worn copy of the Rachmaninoff score she'd kept all these years. The piece was notoriously difficult, with its lush harmonies and technical demands. But as she began to play the opening chords, her fingers remembered more than she expected. For the next several hours, she lost herself in practice, stopping only when a text from Thomas pulled her back to reality. "Just saw the video hit 600K. Views, are you coming to work tomorrow, or are you too famous now?" The question made her pause. She had completely forgotten about her regular job at Bellini's. With the symphony opportunity, Mrs. Chen's offer of regular piano performances, and now this viral attention. Everything was changing so rapidly. She would need to make decisions about work, about living arrangements. Her apartment was too small for a real piano. About how to navigate this sudden shift in her life's direction. But as she looked at the music spread before her, one decision was already clear. After years of silence, she was ready to play again, ready to reclaim the identity she had set aside during those difficult years, ready to be not just May the waitress, but May the pianist. She texted Thomas back, "I'll be there tomorrow, but I have some news to share." Then she called the number on the card from the music shop. "Hi, this is May Lin. I'd like to ask about your piano rental program. I have a performance coming up with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and I need to practice." The words felt strange on her tongue, yet somehow completely right. Like returning home after a long, unexpected detour. She had a lot of work ahead. Hours of practice, repertoire to relearn, a performance career to rebuild. But for the first time in years, the path ahead was clear, illuminated by the spotlight she'd stepped into at Bellini's grand piano. The waitress was becoming a concert pianist, and somewhere she felt certain her mother was smiling. The month, leading up to May's performance with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. Each day seemed to bring new developments, challenges, and opportunities as she worked to reclaim her place in the world of classical music. The morning after her meeting with Nora, May had sat down with Mrs. Chen to discuss her future at Bellini's. The restaurant owner listened attentively as May explained the symphony opportunity, then nodded with understanding. "I knew you wouldn't be serving tables forever," Mrs. Chen said with a hint of pride in her voice. "But I hope you'll consider my offer as well. Weekend performances here could provide steady income while you rebuild your career." They worked out an arrangement. May would play at Bellini's on Friday and Saturday evenings, but would step back, from waiting tables to focus on preparing for her symphony debut. It was a perfect transitional solution, allowing her to maintain financial stability while pursuing her rekindled dream. The rental piano arrived at her apartment the next day. It barely fit in her small living space, requiring her to rearrange all her furniture and practically eliminating her dining area. But the first time she sat down to play, feeling the resonance of real strings, the response of properly weighted keys, she knew it was worth the sacrifice. Her practice schedule became rigorous. She woke early each morning, playing for hours before heading to Bellini's for her weekend performances. Late nights were spent studying recordings of the Rachmaninoff concerto, analyzing different interpretations, reacquainting herself with the emotional landscape of the piece. The physical demands were challenging. Years of carrying trays had built different muscles than those needed for the punishing technical requirements of Rachmaninoff. Her hands and forearms ached at the end of each day, but it was a satisfying pain, the kind that signaled growth and return, not injury. 2 weeks before the concert, May had her first rehearsal with the orchestra. Walking into Symphony Center with its storied history and perfect acoustics, she felt like an imposter. The grand Steinway on stage seemed to watch her approach, judging whether she was worthy of its voice. The orchestra members regarded her with polite curiosity as Nora introduced her. She could read the questions in their eyes. Who is this unknown pianist? Why have we never heard of her? Can she really handle Rachmaninoff? The conductor, a serious man with salt and pepper hair and intense eyes, greeted her with reserved professionalism. "Ms. Lin, we're looking forward to working with you. Shall we begin with the first movement?" Mai nodded, her mouth too dry for words. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The familiar opening chord centered her, pushing away her nerves as the music took over. When the orchestra joined in, the experience was transcendent. After years of playing alone, she was suddenly surrounded by sound, lush strings, resonant, brass, delicate woodwinds, all responding to and supporting her playing. It was like moving from a black and white world into vivid color. Though there were rough spots that needed work, by the end of the rehearsal, she could sense a shift in the orchestra's attitude. The initial skepticism had given way to respect. The conductor nodded approvingly. Very promising, Ms. Lin. Very promising indeed. Nora, who had been watching from the audience, came to the stage with a satisfied smile. I told you she was exceptional, she said to the conductor, not bothering to lower her voice. As May gathered her music, several orchestra members approached to introduce themselves. A violinist about her age was particularly warm. That was beautiful. Playing, she said. Especially the second movement. I'm Lily, by the way. A few of us usually grab coffee after rehearsal. Would you like to join us? That simple invitation marked another transition. From outsider to colleague. Over coffee, May found herself drawn into conversations about interpretation, favorite recordings, and the challenges of performance life. These were her people, speaking her language. How had she survived so long without this kind of connection? As the concert approached, public interest in May's story continued to grow. The symphony's publicity department arranged interviews with local media, and a popular classical music blog featured her in a profile titled, From Serving Tables to Serving Rachmaninoff. The attention was uncomfortable at first. May had grown accustomed to invisibility, to being the person who brought food and disappeared into the background. Now strangers recognized her from the viral video, approaching her at Bellini's to request particular pieces or ask for photos. You're handling it all remarkably well, Nora commented during their final meeting before the concert. Many musicians struggle with this aspect of the profession. I still find it strange, May admitted. I'm the same person I was a month ago. People can hear me now. Nora's expression softened. That's exactly right. You were always this musician even when you were filling water glasses and taking orders. The world just needed the chance to discover what was already there. The night before the concert, May couldn't sleep. She sat at her piano in the dark, not playing, just resting her fingers on the cool keys and thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much to nurture her talent. About the years at Bellini's which had taught her resilience and humility. About Mrs. Chen, who had seen something in her that she herself had almost forgotten. Would her mother be proud of the woman she had become? Of the way she had found her, way back to music, even after such a long detour? The answer came not in words but in a feeling of peace that settled over her. Of course, her mother would be proud. She had never wanted May to abandon music, only to find her way through grief and hardship back to what she loved. Morning came with crystal clarity. May moved through her pre-performance ritual with calm purpose, a light breakfast, a gentle warm-up at the piano, then changing into the new dress she had purchased for the occasion. It was deep red, elegant but not flashy, the color of passion and courage. When she arrived at Symphony Center, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Her name was on the program, on posters in the lobby. New Voices series presents May Lin, piano. It still didn't seem quite real. Backstage, she found a small vase of white lilies with a card from the Bellini staff. From serving spoons to Steinways, we knew you were extraordinary. Knock 'em dead. Peeking through the curtain, she was startled to see the hall was nearly full. The New Voices series typically drew modest audiences, but word of the Waitress pianist had spread. In the front row, she spotted Mrs. Chen in an elegant black dress, sitting straight-backed and proud. The orchestra took their places, instruments gleaming under the stage lights. The conductor entered to applause, then extended his hand toward the wings, inviting May to join them on stage. The walk to the piano felt both endless and instantaneous. The applause was warm, curious. These people had come to hear her, many drawn by her unusual story, wondering if the viral video had been a fluke or a glimpse of genuine talent. As she settled at the piano, adjusting the bench one final time, May felt a strange calm descend. This moment, sitting before a concert grand on the stage of Symphony Center, was both brand new and deeply familiar, like returning to a childhood home that remains etched in memory. The conductor caught her eye, asking silently if she was ready. She nodded, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The famous opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto filled the hall, dark, resonant, full of longing. As her initial solo passage gave way to the orchestra's entrance, May felt herself becoming part of something larger, her individual voice joining a greater conversation of sound. She played with technical precision, yes, but also with the emotional authenticity that comes only from having lived through struggle and emergence. The piece spoke of melancholy and triumph, of darkness yielding to light, themes that echoed her own journey so perfectly it was as if Rachmaninoff had written it for this very moment. Time seemed to both stand still and rush forward. The first movement flowed into the second, its achingly beautiful theme unfurling like a ribbon of moonlight. In the third movement, as the tempo quickened and the music raced toward its triumphant conclusion, May felt as though she were flying, carried on wings of sound and memory and newfound purpose. When the final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of absolute silence, that magical pause between the end of a performance and the audience's response, when the music still hangs in the air like a held breath. Then came the applause, not polite or curious now, but thunderous. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. May stood to acknowledge them, overwhelmed by the wave of sound and emotion crashing over her. The conductor shook her hand warmly, and the concertmaster handed her a bouquet of flowers. As she took her bows, she found Mrs. Chen in the audience, tears streaming unashamedly down her face. Near her sat Thomas and several other Bellini staff members, cheering wildly for their colleague who had emerged from the shadows into the spotlight. Backstage after the performance, May was surrounded by well-wishers, orchestra members offering congratulations, audience members who had found their way past security, music critics requesting brief comments. Through it all, she felt a curious sense of duality, still the same person she had always been, yet somehow transformed by stepping fully into her true identity. Nora appeared, her usually composed face alight with satisfaction. "Magnificent," she said simply. "Absolutely magnificent." "Thank you for believing in me," May replied, "for giving me this chance." "Talent like yours creates its own chances," Nora said. "I merely opened a door. You walked through it on your own power." She paused. "We should talk soon about next season. There's already interest in having you return for a full concerto program." Later that night, after the celebrations had wound down and May had returned to her small apartment, she sat once more at her rented piano. The exhilaration of the performance still coursed through her veins, making sleep impossible. She opened her laptop to find her email flooded with messages, from old classmates who had seen the concert livestream, from music teachers who remembered her from before, from strangers moved by her playing and her story. One email in particular caught her eye, from the director of a community music school on the city's west side. "We serve children who wouldn't otherwise have access to music education. After hearing your remarkable story and extraordinary playing, I wonder if you might consider teaching a masterclass for our advanced students. Your journey would inspire them immensely." May read the IE message twice, something stirring in her heart. Here was a way to not only continue her own musical rebirth, but to help nurture the next generation, to be for others what her teachers had been for her, what her mother had been for her. She began typing a reply, accepting the invitation with genuine enthusiasm. As her fingers moved across the keyboard, she realized they no longer ached from practice. They had remembered their purpose. Outside her window, dawn was breaking over Chicago, painting the sky in hues of promise. May looked around her tiny apartment, at the piano that barely fit, at the shelf where her mother's photograph stood next, to the concert program from tonight, her name printed in bold letters. Life had taken her on an unexpected detour, but music had waited patiently for her return. And now, in ways she could never have imagined while carrying plates at Bellini's, she had found her way home. She wasn't just the waitress who could play piano anymore. She was May Lin, concert pianist. And this was just the beginning.